Well, you're about to read chapter 5 of Books Jesus Read. And a little like the previous chapter in which you learned from the fictional story of Judith, this is also a work of fiction, but based in history at a particular time. It is projected into the past. It's the story of Tobit. That's what the name of the story usually goes by. But it's really about two characters, Tobit and Sarah. If the previous story was about the deliverance of God's people from his enemy, this is more a story of individual deliverance. It's a great story as a kind of backdrop to the New Testament because Tobit is an individual who is like a forerunner of the Pharisees. As you read about Tobit and his story in the opening chapters or the opening sections of this particular chapter, you're going to see about how single-mindedly focused he is on keeping the law and doing everything that the law prescribes. And not only that, but he rehearses again and again, I, Tobit, and he'll give a little speech in which he defines his spirituality as it was at that time. And that spirituality for Jews in this era had to do with purely maintaining the law of Moses and not corrupting themselves. Tobit may possibly be familiar to some of you as the story, again, you find it in Catholic Bibles, but not in Protestant Bibles. The story of that guy who was blinded by bird poop. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but in the course of doing a good deed and serving, which is what Tobit is all about, doing good works, he falls asleep in the courtyard of his house at night. He lies up against a wall, and a bird poops in his eyes, and the films sink in, and when he wakes up in the morning, he's almost blind, and then he goes totally blind, and God delivers him. That's the story of Tobit. Sarah is a character introduced later in the chapter, and Sarah is a woman who is afflicted by a demon, and it's very curious. It may sound a little familiar to you. This is a woman who has a jealous demon, and so she marries 7 times because each time she marries, before she can consummate the marriage, the demon kills her husband. All right? And so if you remember from the teaching of Jesus in Matthew chapter 22, the Sadducees come up to Jesus and say, Rabbi, a woman had 7 husbands and they all died. Which will be your husband in the resurrection? Of course, the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. They're testing Jesus. And he says something to that effect. You don't know the power of God or whatever. But we wonder if this story could be in the backdrop or behind the telling of of that parable that Jesus gave, or that test that Jesus replied to, the story of Sarah. Sarah is afflicted by a jealous demon. She needs to be delivered. She prays to God. Tobit, in doing his works of service that you'll read about, at the risk of his own life, he's in the process of doing a good deed when he's struck blind. So we're led to believe in this fictional story that through no fault of his own, he's afflicted. How will God deliver these two people? Well, it's a beautiful story because it weaves together at the end, and their two destinies really become one in the Lord. So Tobit receives healing, as you'll see, and Sarah receives deliverance in a really fun, whimsical kind of way. Now, the poignant part of this story is that it's in the midst of their suffering that their spirituality emerges. And in this story, you're going to read and see Tobit crying out to God and praying, but praying like a Pharisee, frankly. And Sarah praying to God because they've done everything that they know to do is right. They've been obedient, and yet now they're suffering at the hands of things that are just beyond their control. And slowly, the two stories begin to move toward a single destiny. This story is important for you to read as background to the emergence of Pharisees. Tobit clearly reflects that. Sadducees is reflected in the story of Sarah. And just this belief that true spirituality lies in the uncompromising obedience to the law of Moses and doing everything right. It's hard for us to imagine now on this end, and thank God we're under grace, we're not under law. But in order to understand the dynamics of the New Testament, the back and forth between Jesus, the disciples, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, this story shows us that background. It helps us understand, even what Samaritans were thinking and what other godly people were thinking in that age. And in that sense, gives us critical background to the New Testament. I hope you enjoy this story.